Does God exist? According to Marcus Aurelius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. My name is Dre, and that's our topic of the day for this installment. Like the previous 5 episodes, we'll cover 5 individual questions and attempt to answer them all using only material written by Marcus Aurelius. But first, let's do a quick introduction. Marcus Aurelius lived from 121 AD to 180 AD and was the Roman emperor from the time he was 40 years old up until his death. He was the only emperor who could also be called a philosopher, as he wrote down his thoughts in what is today known as his Meditations. This is an interesting piece of work, as he never wrote it with the intention to publish or distribute it by any means. He simply wrote for himself, and that's possibly where a lot of the text's charm and identity comes from. Though Latin was widespread, he wrote his ideas down in Greek, as that was the language philosophy was primarily taught in. Meditations is divvied up into 12 books, and that's using the word liberally, as each book consists of its own number of chapters, which range from a few words to a few pages each. They aren't categorized into any particular order or follow any specific theme. They are just as they are, written so that they wouldn't be forgotten. And of course, never were. It's a work where one could open up to any page and just start reading. So let's dive into it with our first of 5 questions, which explores the existence and very idea of God and his relationship to humankind with our first passage. Departure from the world of men is nothing to fear if gods exist, because they would not involve you in any harm. If they do not exist, or if they have no care for humankind, then what is life to me in a world devoid of gods or devoid of providence? But they do exist, and they do care for humankind. Meditations 2.11. The first part of this passage deals with the idea of death and how Marcus assures fellow believers that if the gods do exist, the transition from this world into the next is nothing to fear. There won't be any pain, any prolonged suffering, just a peaceful passing. He then imagines a world where they don't exist at all, and what that would mean for mankind. Even worse, that what if they do exist, but don't care about humankind at all? It's not something pleasant, as it paints a picture of a world left to fend for itself, as the gods stand around with their backs to their very own creation. What good or use is it to be part of that creation in the first place? There isn't any. So Marcus simply states that life wouldn't mean anything at all to him in such a reality. Luckily, he goes back to his beginning assertion with the end of the quote and proudly claims that they do exist and do care for humankind. This can be seen in a multitude of ways. A creator caring for his creation, providence and fate not being the least of which. We all have a path to follow, and Marcus points out that we won't be alone while walking it. That there is, in fact, a loving and caring spiritual nature protecting us and providing us direction at all turns of our lives. Passage number 2. To those who ask, where then have you seen the gods? What conviction of their existence leads you to this worship of them? I reply that I have not seen my own soul either, and yet I honor it. So it is with the gods too. From my every experience of their power, time after time, I am certain that they exist, and I revere them. Meditations 12.28. So to follow up the previous point, Marcus then asks the question that may be on everyone's mind. How do you know? Have you ever seen such a thing that could be called God in person? He answers elegantly and states, as we've just read, that not everything in existence is visible. He uses his soul as a poetic example. But what about emotions themselves? Just because we can't see a tangible, physical version of love or anger or sadness doesn't mean that they don't exist. However, while we can't see them, we feel them. We sense their existence in such examples, like two lovers holding hands, which evokes the idea of love itself, and so on. Proof is truly everywhere, if we look for it with the right set of eyes. This flows perfectly into the second half of the quote. Marcus's assurance that a higher power does indeed exist because of his own life's experiences. He looked for proof of their existence in everything he did, and so he found it. Much like it says in Proverbs 3:6, seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which paths to take. I believe Marcus may have been a prime example of this teaching. He revered the spirituality he so deeply felt because he governed with it, loved with it, acted through it, and so on. He used it wisely, and it treated him kindly in return. Thousands of years later, his name hasn't vanished from the records of time, and that could be because he was led down the right paths, through the right attitude which he held. So through those two vital pieces of text in regards to Marcus's spirituality, we see that he indeed was a believer in some type of higher power. He has a lot more to say on the subject, but those examples will be better used in future talks. Specifically, the fifth question, which concerns the nature of time itself. For now, using Marcus's philosophy, we'll just answer the incredibly important question of God's existence with a profound yes. Even if we can't physically see him, we can see his works, his undying love, and his proof of existence itself. That'll do it for tonight's installment. Tomorrow, we'll look at the question of whether or not we're driven by fate or indeed have free will. Thank you to everyone who keeps listening and downloading these talks. I'm always grateful for the support and will continue my best to put out quality episodes that get our minds moving. Until tomorrow, may God bless us all. Indeed. Take care. Fate or free will, according to Marcus Aurelius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and we're revisiting this interesting question, though this time through Marcus Aurelius' eyes. So let's not waste any time and jump right into our very first passage. All that happens has been fated by the whole from the beginning and spun for your own destiny. Meditations 4.26. This pretty much sums up Marcus's thoughts on the matter as simply as anything else we'll cover in tonight's talk. He is on the side of fate, and while we'll speak more about what implications that has on free will, let's examine the fatalistic aspect of life first. If everything has been spun for our own destinies, then there is a definite purpose to each individual life. For just because fate exists doesn't necessarily mean we have individual destinies. It could just mean that we have a pre-planned end, without the added weight of meaning attached to it. But Marcus is saying that there is, in fact, a destiny we all have to fulfill. We saw this concept being proven by the Bible in our first season, and it's definitely one I agree with. Passage number 2. That this has happened to you was prescribed for you and is related to you. A thread of destiny spun for you from the first by the most ancient causes. Meditations 5.8.5. This quote is similar to the first, but it implies something very beautiful along with saying that we all have a designed destiny. It's also saying that every instance, moment, or happening is directly related to our own specific paths. That perhaps we're given a certain amount of responsibility because of what we've already gone through in the past. An example may be a hardship we go through because we'd been prepared for it by a previous one, and so on. It's also saying that someone's responsibilities may not be right for another's, because the two have had very different paths, leading them up to their individual present moments. Basically, everyone's journey is prescribed and designed according to their own strengths, personalities, and gifts that we've been given by God. And that's a beautiful thing to think about. Passage number 3. Whatever happens to you was being prepared for you from everlasting. And the mesh of causes was ever spinning from eternity, both your own existence and the incidents of this particular happening. Meditations 10.5. While it may seem like a similar idea to the other two, this is a deep quote with many implications. It reinforces Marcus's opinion that fate is, in fact, the leading factor when talking about our lives' trajectories. That what happens to us, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, was always meant to happen, initiated by an eternal main cause affecting all other causes, which led up to any particular point in a person's life. For example, a nearly infinite row of falling dominoes, each moved by the previous one, and so on, until we reach the unmoved mover, or God himself. Through this initial divine spark, an incredibly specific set of events was put into motion that make our lives an everlasting chain reaction of causes and effects. There is another idea here as well, where Marcus writes of our own existence spinning from eternity. This implies that we we're always meant to be. Each and every one of us. A notion that I agree with wholeheartedly. Before our first breath, or that of our ancestors, before the first star or planet was formed, before everything we were to be. Everything planned down to the smallest detail. What then of free will? Where do one's actions fit into the puzzle of their life? Do we even have free will to begin with if everything is set in stone from before the beginning of time itself? I've previously stated that I believe in free will, that it's God's gift to humankind. But how can I also believe in Marcus's assertion that we were always meant to be as well? That what happens is just an effect of a previous cause, outside of our control. I suppose that's where destiny comes in, to bring it back to his initial idea. That the destination doesn't change, only the route. How we get to where we're supposed to end up is entirely in our hands. The ones who accept this are perhaps the same ones who make the most of their time while here in this world. So what's my final summation of this question? Imagine a Rubik's Cube with innumerable sides. It too has a completed configuration, though how one reaches its finished end is truly up to them. Motion by motion, line by line, the echoes of existence represented by different shades begin to match up, and a beautiful picture slowly comes into view. This is the marriage of fate and free will. So that's where we'll end this installment for tonight. In our next talk, we'll look at the existence of evil and how Marcus viewed it from his unique perspective. I again, and always, thank all of you who listen. And if you ever want to reply or interact, please find the Summit Study Hall channel on YouTube and comment on any video posted. I appreciate you more than you know. Until tomorrow, may God bless us all. Indeed. Take care. Why does evil exist? According to Marcus Aurelius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's what we'll delve into for tonight's installment. Through a few passages from Marcus's meditations, we'll come to a better understanding of his thoughts and opinions on the matter. So let's get right into our first quote. Say to yourself first thing in the morning, today I shall meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, aggressive, treacherous, malicious, unsocial. All this has afflicted them through their ignorance of true good and evil. But I have seen that the nature of good is what is right, and the nature of evil what is wrong. Meditations 2.1. We can relate to this passage as we've all met these types of people on our paths from time to time. Marcus seems to be saying here, don't let it be a surprise when you inevitably come across them. But it's interesting that he also says these characteristics are all because of their ignorance of true good and evil. That may be a reference to the concept that Socrates had about virtue and vice. That virtue comes from having the knowledge of what is truly good. And to know what is good is to do it as well. As we've all heard the saying, If they knew better, they'd do better. And vice being the result of ignorance of what is good. How can we do something good if we don't know about it in the first place? That would automatically mean we're doing something not good or evil, following this logic. It's a heavy term, but one that makes sense in this situation. So it goes that Marcus finishes the quote by clearly explaining that all which is good is right, and all which is evil is wrong. Now, assuming there are varying degrees, we can pose the idea that it is also a subjective set of definitions. Maybe the same action to one person is right, while the next person sees it as wrong. That's, of course, where the study of ethics comes in. Passage number 2. What comes from men is welcome for our kinship's sake, but sometimes pitiable also, in a way, because of their ignorance of good and evil. And this is no less a disability than that which removes the distinction of light and dark. Meditations 2.13. So to follow from our previous point, that virtue or good is knowledge, and that vice or evil is ignorance, we can't actually be mad at those who seem to be morally ignorant from the start. The Stoic view elicits pity above all else for the person, and it puts a responsibility on those who do know the difference between right and wrong to educate the others on their unethical stance. This quote also mentions the removal of the distinction of light and dark, which flows from our last point. If there is no difference between a room that is literally filled with light and not darkness, or vice versa, then the person within the room doesn't even know what they are looking at or what to look for in the first place, as everything seems the same, either with the lights on or off. This can relate to the way that one who is morally ignorant views the world around them. They don't know what they're looking at or looking for. They just coast onward until the next interesting thing grabs their attention, rightly or wrongly. Passage number 3. You know from experience that in all your wanderings you have nowhere found the good life. Not in logic, not in wealth, not in glory, not in indulgence. Nowhere. Where then is it to be found? In doing what man's nature requires. And how is he to do this? By having principles to govern his impulses and actions. What are those principles? Those of good and evil. The belief that nothing is good for a human which does not make him just, self-controlled, brave, and free, and nothing evil which does not make him the opposite of these. Meditations 8.1. So this is truly the overall theme of tonight's question and Marcus's opinion on it. Why does evil exist? Because of man's ignorance and the actions which make him the opposite of just, self-controlled, brave, and free, which we can say as unjust, uncontrolled, fearful, and captive. The more knowledge one has of the absolute good, the closer they are to absolute virtue and the ability to express it with that much more ease and regularity. Ignorance is the ultimate cause of evil, as even Socrates puts it. Nobody willingly or knowingly does wrong. We could, of course, pick that apart and study its implications all night, but for now, we can just rest assured with the idea that for most people, knowing good is to do good. And that's a pretty comforting thought. And with that, we wrap up another episode. Tomorrow we'll look at Marcus's opinions on beauty and what constitutes something or anything as beautiful. There's always so much to be said at the end of these, but I'll just stick with thanking each and every one of you who listen daily or nightly and who continue to inspire me to keep putting these short episodes out. Until tomorrow, may God bless us all. Indeed. Take care. What is beauty? According to Marcus Aurelius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's our topic of the night for this installment. Through a couple of Marcus's thoughts, we'll explore what beauty meant to him and how it shaped his overall philosophy. It's one of my favorite questions of the 5 we ask, and one which is easy to get wrapped up in. I'll try my best, though, to stay as on point as possible and keep my thoughts clear. So let's get right into it with our first of 2 passages. No nature is inferior to art. In fact, the arts imitate the variety of natures. If that is so, then the most perfect and comprehensive of all natures could not be surpassed by any artistic invention. Now all arts create the lower in the interests of the higher. So this is the way of universal nature too. Meditations 11.10. The most concise way to put this idea into words may be that nature is the highest form of art there is. This makes God the ultimate artist, and to relate it back to Plato's definition of beauty, indeed the ultimate poet as well, as life can be described as poetry itself. But Marcus has categorized all art as being beneath nature, as all art imitates nature, and, according to him, never the other way around. He states that the most exquisite piece of art wouldn't be able to outdo the beauty and elegance of nature itself. The question then becomes, does art's imitation of nature provide the audience the opportunity for more empathy or knowledge of the nature which is being depicted? For example, does seeing a film based on a divorce make the subject matter more relatable than just hearing about a real case? Does the film give an insight into the feelings and hardships which the divorce causes throughout the family in a way that simply hearing it from someone else doesn't? Or how about seeing a painting of a tree? Is it more beautiful than an actual tree because it shows how that specific artist interpreted the original tree in the first place? Does the medium matter? Is there more emotion in a photograph than a drawing? These are the things which come to mind when saying that no nature is inferior to art. So then, which is more beautiful, the subject or the work of art? Was the woman of the Mona Lisa praised for her beautiful smile before Leonardo da Vinci painted it in his unique way? Did his painting make it famous? Or was the smile always meant to go down in history for its subtle beauty? Nature, then, could also be regarded as the perfect piece of art. Something which imitates perfected ideas, or universals, to again reference Plato, in the heavenly realm. All of the roses we see here being the particulars of the most perfect type of rose, which is found only in the heavens themselves. If art truly imitates nature, then the art of nature itself simply imitates ideas put forward by God so that they may be relatable to us while here on earth, preparing us for the divine nature which exists beyond this world. Passage number 2. Everything in any way beautiful has its beauty of itself, inherent and self-sufficient. Praise is no part of it. At any rate, praise does not make anything better or worse. This applies even to the popular conception of beauty, as in material things or works of art. So does the truly beautiful need anything beyond itself? No more than law, no more than truth, no more than kindness or integrity. Which of these things derives its beauty from praise or withers under criticism? Does an emerald lose its quality if it is not praised? And what of gold, ivory, purple, a lyre, a dagger, a flower, a bush? Meditations 4.20. Does the truly beautiful need anything beyond itself? What a powerful question. I just wanted to pause a moment and appreciate its line of thinking. That which is truly beautiful almost knows it, and so needs no humanly praise. Will an actor winning an Academy Award for a role make the movie any better than it was beforehand? Marcus doesn't think so. Just because something beautiful is described as beautiful doesn't make it any more beautiful in any sense. We see this in countless of other examples, but to bring it back to our previous point, perhaps the best example is nature itself. The entire universe, no matter how much praise or criticism it receives, will never lose an ounce of its awe-inspiring grandeur. So what is beauty? That which is truly beautiful on its own, regardless of abundant praise or a lack of it, seen not just through tangible things, but emotions, random acts of kindness, the subtleties which make our human lives so wonderfully artistic on a day-to-day basis, whether we acknowledge them or not. We are the ultimate artwork, and the nature we imitate or represent is a spiritual one, which originates from deep within, crafted by a master creator. Thank you for sticking it out with me through another installment. We'll begin wrapping it up for tonight as we prepare for just one more question posed to Marcus Aurelius before moving on to one of my favorite philosophers, Saint Augustine. Until tomorrow, may God bless us all. Indeed. Take care. How does time move? According to Marcus Aurelius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. My name is Dre, and that's our final question for the Stoic philosopher before moving on to the medieval period proper. Through a couple of his writings, we'll analyze how the present relates to the past as well as the future, as seen through Marcus's eyes. So let's dive right into it with our very first quote. Everything which happens was always so in the past, will be the same again in the future, and is happening now across the world. Each of us lives only the present moment, and the present moment is all we lose. Meditations 12.26. What this passage seems to be saying is akin to the phrase, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I, of course, could be wrong and always welcome discussion about these topics. But what I'm getting from the beginning of this quote is that everything which happens has always happened in some way, shape, or form, and indeed will happen again in the future. Wars being fought, lovers finding each other, stories being written, everything has always been the same and is in fact happening across the world at this very moment. This idea also brings to mind a sense of unified experience, that if everything is happening across the world at this very moment, then we can all relate to one another through our shared experiences and circumstances. Perhaps what's happened to one person hasn't yet happened to another, but inevitably will. And regardless where the specific experience falls on their individual timeline, in the end, we can all relate to one another through the shared familiarity with life itself. The second half of the passage specifies how we progress through the journey of life, that each of us lives one moment at a time, which can be related back to Plato's view of time as an everlasting moment in a way, and that it's perpetually now, which I think most people would agree with. Finally, I think it's a very powerful statement to say that the present moment is all we lose. Experiences may come and go, but the present moment is truly all we have to lose in the first place. However, it's an interesting dichotomy when thinking of our previous point we made with Plato, that the present is everlasting. The present is either stationary or in constant flux from one moment to the other. Or can the two thoughts actually be compatible? Like a person driving a car, their body is at rest, but the vehicle, much like the movement of time, is taking them from point A to point B. The present also is at rest, but the flow of time moves us from point A to point B. And once we're at point B, point A is gone. And that's really all we've lost or have to lose, according to Marcus. Passage number 2. Remind yourself, too, that each of us lives only in the present moment, a mere fragment of time. The rest is life past or uncertain future. Meditations 3.10. The first half of this passage reiterates what we've just discussed, but let's look at the intriguing second half. If the rest of our non-present time is either life past or uncertain future, then what of our black universe theory we previously discussed? Do the past and future live alongside the present, or don't they? Take the future, for instance. It's uncertain from our present perspective. But does that mean it's not already happening in its own present time frame? Taking Marcus's view into account, that the present moment is all we have, neither the past or future seem to exist at all, as point A was or will be the present as some specific place, regardless of if it's now, in the past, or future. This is another topic that we could spend all night talking about, and that's something I'd love to do if I could. But for now, let's conclude from Marcus's thoughts that time moves one present moment per instance. That's something we can wrap our minds around, even if the implications seem a little more convoluted. And with that, we come to another end of another philosopher's theories on our quest to finding the best answers possible. The next philosopher on our list is St. Augustine, and I'm truly excited to begin his set of these 5 questions tomorrow. So until then, my prayers are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care.